A while back I looked at Capcom's forgotten third-person shooter Lost Planet, so now it's time to check out the cult favourite 2010 sequel. While the original pulled from a couple of Capcom's franchises, namely Monster Hunter and Bionic Commando, the primary focus here was a heavily cooperative title appropriate in the wake of Gears of War and Left 4 Dead. I find it funny how the industry chases mechanical trends like cooperative gameplay and open world sandboxes, then changing gear to linear story-driven games. Capcom did this very thing with Lost Planet 3 in 2013. So unlike the first game, it's much harder to talk about Lost Planet 2 today, with its multiplayer servers shut down, and also being nearly unplayable thanks to games for Windows Live, which you must defeat before getting further than the menu. We are so fucked when it comes to all those DRM always online games. How long you think before Konami pulls the servers on MGS5, making the game impossible to fully complete? And before you post that comment, buddy, no. Having some bizarro workaround to maybe play together just isn't in my schedule. Thanks for the offer. Although there is a system link option, so if you have a buddy that's up to play, it is viable then. Anyway, let's get back on track. Instead of following a set main character and crew, Lost Planet 2 tells the same events concurrently between the different factions that make up EDN 3. The events of the first game are unimportant, besides the environment is now shifting to more diverse biomes of oceans, jungles and deserts. Despite only being 10 years later, there's plenty of infrastructure in all settlements throughout. The campaign is made up of 6 episodes where you cycle between 4 different squads, either the chaotic pirates, the more professional Nevik organization, or some mercenaries trying to scratch out a living. How different events are known or encountered reminds me of Half-Life and its expansions. Instead of spending the first half of the game fighting the Acrid, they take the backseat, with most of the combat being against the different factions before being revealed that Nevik is planning to destroy the world again. Who the fuck keeps giving these guys money for their Armageddon plans that keep flopping? I get it that Capcom uses the evil corporation trope as a crutch, but come on. Now, as you'd imagine, having 5 different squads across only a 6 to 8 hour campaign doesn't lead to engaging characters or plotlines. Half your teams don't even have names and are mostly differentiated in outfits and accents. Having the Nevik commandos ordered to disregard collateral damage and the Tusken Raider lookalikes be more concerned with stealing stuff than any overarching mission are definitely some of the highlights. There's a sizable amount of cinematics between stages, impossible gun carters, overly done speeches, and general action cheese. I don't mind them honestly, and they fit the faster pace, though they did seem very familiar, and that's probably because the producer and director, Oguru and Takeuchi respectively, worked on Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, so this level of grandiose bleeding through makes sense. However, it's in these cutscenes you do start to see the technical limitations of Lost Planet 2. Despite coming out 3 years later, the character models have much less detail. Everyone's got this very bizarre 1,000-yard stare and are incapable of moving their fingers, it seems, let alone their eyelids. That is, of course, if their faces aren't entirely covered, because who needs lip syncing? This is understandable since the story is simply not the focus of the game. Lost Planet 2 goes all in for much larger scripted set pieces to mixed success. Because of my offline situation, I'm critiquing this as a single player experience. I know that will upset people, but you know, you can always just not watch the video. The game is broken up into stages where you either fight through waves of enemies, activate different nodes that work as respawn points, and defeat bosses. After clearing a stage, you get ranked and given points on speed and completing mini challenges, like combo kills, clearing the map, and not dying. It's hard to fail missions, as whenever you die, you just get plopped back in. It's not like Battlefield where you have a set number of tickets that can be lost. The only things you need to worry about is your health and ammunition. The former is refilled by using a supply of T energy picked up from fallen enemies, and the latter is restocked by pickups. If you run too low, your buddies can distribute T energy to you, and vice versa. There's always plenty of ammo lying around, so you're rarely in short supply. Your squad mates can't be ordered around and will often die or get lost in the environment, but they are capable of some cool feats, like using heavy weapons or occasionally driving vehicles, and best of all, attracting heat away from you. Lost Planet 2 is thankfully not a cover-based shooter, which encourages free-flowing combat and movement. The grapple claw can reach vantage points or whisk you out of danger, and the controls for combat are simple enough. Enemies are numerous but hardly threatening, and the light auto-aiming makes headshots a non-issue. The weapons on offer are carry-ons from the prior game with a couple of modifications. They sound cool and have some really neat additions, like the gun sword, that doubles as a slow-firing battle rifle and a powerful melee weapon. Oddly though, weapons can only be unlocked via a slot machine in your profile progression menu with points earned via playing. This is often random shit like emotes and minor buffs, so unless you get lucky, you're going to be stuck with a lot of the same gear in the campaign. Besides on-foot action, there's the numerous VSs. Mechs can be equipped with different weapons and help back you up in a fight. VSs range from light fighters, hovercrafts, chicken walkers and spider tanks that use different weapons scattered about. They control a bit like the mechs from Mech Assault for the Xbox and are fairly chunky when hopping about, but their firepower is substantial. You can attach energy and explosive gear that absolutely annihilates the larger Acrid and enemy VSs. Unfortunately, you don't get to use them nearly as much, most only appear for 1 or 2 stages, though still easily some of the best sections. Design-wise, the biggest hindrance towards Lost Planet 2's gameplay is the overloaded control schemes largely unimproved from the first game. Now I really like the grapple hook, but it's awkward to move around with. You have to constantly reposition yourself and guess at what actual terrain it works on. It gets worse with the VSs. Instead of just one default scheme, they're like 3. Airborne vehicles have to be sped up and down to prevent them from automatically transforming, and just entering them is a pain. Press Q to enter, then press X to turn on, or Q again to exit. Or sometimes it's just press Q to enter and then it automatically starts. It just ends up spinning yourself out whenever you hop in. Collecting ammunition or different equipment is done by standing on them and pressing a button. You don't just instantly rearm, and if you want to swap out one gun for another, you have to stop before picking it up. It's just very finicky and wholly outdated. While the gameplay is much faster, it's dogged by these quirks that should have been ironed out by 2010. The level design of the original was at its best in offering large environments with swarms of enemies and minor route options. LP2 doesn't have much in this regard, and seems very unfocused at times. The introductory environments and the advertising material for that matter are set in the lush jungles of EDN. After this, you never come back, and instead spend more time fighting in deserts and dilapidated slums of research centers. These are very sparse environments that are a far cry from the original, which had you scaling mountains and crossing molten caverns. Since you always keep respawning, there's no penalty for turning off your brain and cleaving through the game in good time. I may get some flack for this, but I'm pretty sure LP2 looks worse as well, at least under closer inspection. There might be more texture variety, but on models and surfaces it seems much more murky and flat. The smooth animations and beautiful effects that were so satisfyingly common are now twitchy and absent. It could be said to run better on consoles or less in the stream on servers. Either way, it's a step backwards. On the flip side, there's some really fun striking locations and set pieces like holding out against swarms of monsters, fighting through different train carriages using mechs, storming a beachhead filled with cyborg Acrid, or taking down a space station. The game likes throwing new enemies at you, and there's rarely a repeated section. Overall, because of the multiplayer focus, the larger maps are generally compacted and designed for boss fights. Speaking of, the Acrid, while less abundant, make up the many mini and major fights and are the true high points of the game. These guys are huge, and are each different from the last, with VSs often thrown in with plenty of NPCs, heavy gear, and explosions that turn the regular combat into a struggle of wrangling these beasts. The Monster Hunter influences are starkly apparent, and I can only imagine how much fun these battles would be with friends as you break off limbs and tag team with your VSs. When these elements are combined together, the devs create some really enjoyable fights that utilize the best cooperative features. In one encounter with a ginormous Acrid that looks a fair bit like the Orm from Nausicaa and the sandworms from Dune, your team has to manually load, charge, and fire a massive artillery cannon, which also requires additional maintenance and stockpiling of shells. Even a decade later, it's impressive how it all just clicks together, and you can definitely see how it managed to build up such a well-remembered status among fans. In my totally non-biased opinion, these moments really lift up Lost Planet 2 beyond a C-grade action title to a clever and creative endeavour that just never got the budget or the proper direction that it needed. The aforementioned Windows Live feature is honestly the greatest hurdle, as besides a few crashes, it's pretty cheap and simple to install. Capcom would try to redirect the game into having a more story focus, which evidently failed because a little game known as GTA 5 came out a month later. Smart. If you enjoy Capcom's affinity for fighting big monsters with mechs, or just have a few willing buddies, Lost Planet 2 is a worthwhile use of time.